He's been so patient, especially because he's such a powerful figure nationally. Dr. Rob Wittman, Congressman, 1st District Republican, and he's also the chairman of the House Subcommittee on Military Readiness. Dr. Wittman, good to have you with us, sir.
Good to be with you this morning, John. Thanks for having me.
As always, happy Easter, sir, to you and your family.
Well, happy Easter to you and your family and your listeners.
Let's go right to the Brussels situation. Congressman, today we find out that unfortunately 2 Americans died in that attack. The Belgian authorities rounding some people up. But we've got a real issue here. There's some estimates are saying, up to several thousand ISIS fighters have smuggled their way into the European continent. NATO seems powerless really to do anything. In your position, how do we react to this, sir?
Well, first, John, I want to make sure that we send all of our thoughts and prayers to the families of the perished and to those that were wounded there, and also our thoughts and prayers out to the people of Belgium. This is a tragedy that they've suffered at the hands of these terrorists, these barbarians, and we have to do everything we can to help them in defeating these terrorists. As you point out, though, the problematic issue here is the numbers of these individuals that have now come into Europe, and they've spread out, and that is going to be a challenge not just for this year, but it'll be a challenge for decades to come. That's the magnitude of what they're dealing with there now. These individuals spreading out, then waiting to perpetrate their acts of terrorism is deeply concerning. There does have to be, I believe, a NATO response to this, but there has to be a comprehensive plan in how we address this, and that's where we are right now, and a place that begs for leadership. And there hasn't been that leadership. It used to be the leadership would come from the United States. It does not. This president has no desire in any way, shape, or form to address this in a comprehensive manner to say this is what we're going to do to defeat terrorism. Short of that, too, there's not any one person within the European countries that's come out and says, listen, this should be our comprehensive plan to address this. And the longer the lack of leadership exists, the more foothold these terrorists will gain in areas around the world, including the United States. So, and I'm deeply concerned about this. I do believe, John, that there must be a unified NATO response to this, and that means the United States, along with its NATO partners, need to sit down and have a comprehensive strategy, twofold. One is, what are we going to do to defeat ISIS where it originates, in Syria, in Iraq? But also, what are we going to do to stop the spread, keep additional folks from coming in? And then the third part of the strategy has to be, how then do you find and destroy the people in these countries that want to perpetrate these acts of terrorism? That is their intent, John. They are there to wreak harm. And you saw what happened the other day. They are willing to commit suicide to do that. And it used to be that the critical people in their organization, the bomb makers, were the ones that looked to preserve themselves because they looked to make more bombs. You see now the bomb makers that are now blowing themselves up in these things. That ought to be very concerning to us because that should tell us that those individuals are now large enough in number to where any one is not so valuable that they won't sacrifice themselves in this extremist effort to cut away at our freedoms and liberties. So I can tell you, John, there is much left to be done to defeat terrorism, and it gets larger every day in the scope of the challenge that we face. And if we don't do something now, it's only going to get worse. And this is not a fight that will be done within a year. This will be a fight that will go on for decades in order for us to completely defeat these treacherous individuals that seek one thing, that is to kill and maim as many people that they see that are not inculcated in their extremist form of Islam across the earth.
So, Dr. Wittman, earlier this week, Secretary of State John Kerry says that ISIS is committing genocide. So we still have no declaration of war, no AUMF. We have nothing. People are scratching their heads over this. When is President Obama going to come to Congress with a plan, with some sort of an authorization of war? Because, we sent another, 500 troops in to assist with the base that we have in training the Iraqi fighters. He has no authorization for this. When are we going to get down to business and make some kind of a congressional declaration?
Well, John, as you know, last year, the House Armed Services Committee in the National Defense Authorization Act put a requirement in there that the president provide to Congress a plan to defeat ISIS. He was supposed to do that so that Congress could then take action, as you said, on an authorization of use of military force. The president has not done that. The deadline that's been placed there, and by the way, that bill was passed in a bipartisan way by both the House and the Senate. He was to do that. He has not provided us a plan, and I think that goes right back to what I believe is a lack of want on his part to even put a plan together. I don't think that he wants to address this, and that is regretful, because this is something that has to be done. Short of having a plan from the commander-in-chief, it's difficult for Congress to say, okay, what direction are we going to take? Now we could come up with something, and we could project that. The problem is the commander-in-chief has to implement that, and the commander-in-chief relies on his military leaders, this country's military leaders, within the Pentagon to put together the pieces of that plan. Now, when we ask those military leaders, have you provided information to the White House on what your suggestions would be for a plan to defeat ISIS, they say yes. So it's not as though the president hasn't got the information. It's that he chooses not to take that information and put it together in a plan to give Congress. So it puts Congress in a very, very tough spot to take decisive action going forward, because it's up to the commander-in-chief to say, this is the plan, this is how we're going to defeat ISIS, and for Congress to then debate that plan, look at what we need to do to provide the necessary authorization for that plan, and then to resource that plan. So without leadership there, we continue to flounder. And remember, it's not just the leadership that's lacking here for the role that forces will play in protecting the United States and addressing terrorism in the United States. It's what will we do in shoulder to shoulder with the world to defeat ISIS. That's what's lacking, too. The rest of the world looks at the United States and says, okay, what are you all going to do? And when they see us doing nothing, then the effort stalls, and we see what happened there with the breakdown in intelligence gathering and law enforcement action in Belgium, because there is no unified effort to communicate back and forth. You saw where one of these terrorists came into Belgium from Turkey. President Erdogan in Turkey notified Belgium, and somehow it fell through the cracks. So you have another NATO member telling another NATO member, hey, by the way, you got somebody coming back in your country. That's an issue, and nothing happens. There has to be U.S. leadership in order to have any hope of a unified plan across the world to defeat ISIS.
The lack of leadership that we're seeing is incredible. Dr. Wittman, let's get to Cuba. The president goes there. Raul Castro doesn't bother to meet him at the plane. I thought that was a little bit insulting. Then we get lectured on our record on human rights by the communist dictator. Then we're at baseball games doing waves. Now we're in Argentina doing dances. And you've just called on the president to put a plan together. Obviously, he's got other priorities. I'm sure this weekend he'll be playing golf or something. I'm not big into imagery. I'm more substance, but don't you think that the imagery of the president this week doing waves and tangos when people are dying, don't you think that was just a bad move?
I do, John. I think it shows a complete insensitivity to the disaster and the attack on humanity in Belgium, and the president not even acknowledging that. Now, I don't necessarily think that he needs to fly back to the United States, because I don't know that there's anything substantively that he could do there that he couldn't do in those countries. But I do think it's something simple, John. He could have said, you know what, Mr. Castro, I'm not going to go to the baseball game with you, and out of respect and sensitivity to the victims and the families that have suffered through this Belgian bombing. And the same there in Argentina. It's very simple to change your schedule and say, listen, I'm going to do these things because I do have a true caring in my heart for what these people are going through, and to show that we're in solidarity with what they're going through. I am not going to be out there seeming insensitive to that. And that's unfortunately what the president has done. And then, as you said earlier in the week, when Raul Castro got up there and chastised the United States, and then the president turns around and thanks him for it. I'm like, what in the world is going on here with what's happening, with how we're dealing with the rest of the world? And it's a situation where I think people want a sense that America is taking, again, that leadership role, that there's a strong sense of what America is standing for, what America is asking for other countries in addressing the issues around the world, instead of apologizing for what America does, instead of saying, hey, listen, the exceptionalism that America has displayed is not something that we either stand for today or that we are proud of. Those things, I think, are problematic to a lot of people across the spectrum. And then the complete insensitivity that's showed by the president, who talks about caring for humanity. And it has to be more than just words. He talks about the human condition across the world. Well, when you talk about that, you must act upon those things, and it would have been very easy for him to change his schedule and to do those things. And I think that would have sent a clear signal across the world about where the United States stands with Belgium and with the victims and families of this treacherous barbarity perpetrated by these individuals from ISIS.
I think you're right. It's just incredible. The president, I don't know if he's tone deaf or maybe he just doesn't care, but I thought it was a sad time for America these past several days watching Barack Obama in action. Congressman Wittman, let's get to the budget. You've been a tireless advocate of saying, let's get the people's work done before we go on recess. Now we got another 2-week recess. I'm happy you guys have a recess, honestly. I'm taking 3 days off next week. I understand. I get recess. But you're doing a budget. You're no closer than you were 2 months ago. We've seen this rerun so many times. I'm tired of it. Nobody gets together on the budget. We go into the summer, nothing happens, and then it's an omnibus bill because the government's going to shut down. And we're doing the same thing again, right?
Well,
am I right?
Unfortunately, John, we are not getting the things done that we need to get done. And to me, it's pretty simple going forward. We have got to get a budget done. And last week I put my bill back in again. It says no budget, no pay. Pretty simple. I think that's one of those motivators for Congress to get these things done. And let me speak a little bit about the budget, too. Last year there was a budget deal that I voted against because it actually increases spending, and I don't think it did the things necessary to properly fund our military. Right. Well, we're back in a situation this year where, based on that agreement, the direction is to start at the same number, a number that's $30 billion higher than the year previous, which I believe is absolutely wrong. Now, folks say, $30 billion is not that much in a $3.8 trillion budget. It's not the number. It's the direction in which we must put this budget in. And it can't continue to increase. It's got to be able to decrease. And we have got to do that, John, on the autopilot spending programs. And I think that there's some ways to do it. And we also have to, I believe, make sure the Senate is acting of goodwill, and that Harry Reid, who says that he will act on appropriations bills, will indeed do that. So many of us are skeptical that the Senate will do anything if the House acts. So I think there's some opportunities for us, but I can tell you, I did not vote last year for a budget that increased spending. This year, I can't be in a different position and say, okay, an increase in spending was not okay last year, but an increase in spending this year is indeed okay. So I can tell you, my push to the Speaker and the leadership there is decrease spending, do it in the autopilot spending programs, and make sure we have a trigger mechanism to assure that the Senate is going to act likewise, and make sure that this leads to us getting appropriations bills done. I want to see us get all 12 done, but let's at least get half of them done. Let the Senate get half of them done and get them to the president so he can sign them, because if not, we're going to end up back in a situation of another continuing resolution, right, which I absolutely abhor. It is not the way to budget, and we'll still be on track of this increase in spending. We cannot continue to do that, John.
See, that's why the answer to this is to win the gubernatorial nomination, become governor, and then you call the shots, because I can tell your level of frustration in there. It's so ridiculous. And Of course, your great bill, which is no budget, no pay, can't even get out of committee, so no shocker there. We're out of time. I want to thank Dr. Rob Wittman for being with us. More information, wittman.house.gov. Hey, Rob, it's always an honor to have you on. Thank you for your accessibility, and have a happy Easter with yourself and your family.
John, thank you. You and your family have a happy Easter, and happy Easter all of your listeners, and thanks again for having me on.